Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's assembly. Lockdown has been difficult for all of us, but there is reason to be hopeful. This week in the news, it was announced that over 2 million people have been vaccinated in the United Kingdom, or have received at least their first vaccine. And, of course, there was the inauguration of Joe Biden in the United States, who very much gave a message of peace and unity as part of his inauguration speech, which was a very good message to hear. The other thing that lockdown does give us, of course, is a time to reflect and to gain a sense of perspective, and a time perhaps to help us to evaluate what is important in our lives. I have reflected on a few things over the last few weeks, and I thought this week in Assembly I would share my thoughts on those with you. Lockdown has raised a lot of questions, most importantly the question of what should I do with my time? And it's an important question, and one that can have very positive and negative outcomes for us. We all have in our lives those things that are good for us, and perhaps those things that are not so good for us. You know, that computer game that you spend hours on that just makes you angry, in my case FIFA. Those friends that you hang out with that result in you just sort of feeling more negative or doing things that aren't particularly positive for you. Or, you know, if you really want to look at it, that bar that you keep going to that you come back from and you just have the worst hangovers possible. And I've been reflecting on that this last couple of weeks. What should I do with my time? And in reflecting on that, I looked back a bit at university. And for me at university, the negative thing in my life really was actually a group of friends. And I had kind of three sort of groups of friends in my final year at university. There was a group of friends that I shared a house with. And there was a group of friends that I was doing geography with. And there was a group of friends who lived in the student house next door to ours. And it was that last group of friends really that wasn't any good for me, and I wasn't really any good for them. And these are people really that I'm no longer in touch with. And I suppose the lockdown lesson for this is to spend time and effort with the people and the things that are going to be positive for you. True friends, I think, are the ones that you could call on at kind of 2 a.m. and they turn up and help you. Likewise, they are the kind of people who could call you at 2 a.m. and you would turn out to help them. And I think Joe Biden said that quite well in his inauguration speech yesterday. He said there are times when we all need a boost and a lift from others, and there are times when we all need to kind of boost and lift others up. And so I think that's important. What should we do with our time? I think we need to do things that are going to be positive for us and positive for our futures. So perhaps those people, those places, those things that are negative in our lives, perhaps it's now time to reflect on that and to stop giving those so much of your time. Get rid of those kind of excess choices of things to do and try to leave yourself with just a few good options. Going back to the university friends, I have regular talks with my former housemates. I have regular talks with my former sort of course mates, if you like, and have been over lockdown. I haven't heard from that group of neighbours for about 5 years. So that's perhaps a reflection of it. And in lockdown, the one thing we do have is time. So I would suggest try and use that time for what you value and be the person that you would want to call. And that's perhaps a positive message there. The second thing that I have reflected on is trying to live in the moment, trying to not leave those sort of crumbs behind that you end up regretting. In other words, giving things and your people your undivided attention when you're doing things and when you're with people. This way you won't leave things out or miss things that you might eventually regret later. At the start of the first lockdown, I was guilty of trying to do sort of several things at the same time. That caused me quite a lot of stress, as you can imagine. and meant that I did actually miss things. So I'm really sort of encouraging you to try and live for the moment. Thinking about it, I try to do this when I am not in school. So that's why perhaps I should have listened to my own advice, and I don't really know why I was trying to do something different when I was in school or virtually in school. Most years I try to go skiing, and I usually go to Canada, which my friends in the UK just don't really understand. They always say to me, why are you traveling for kind of 10 hours to go somewhere where, you know, the time difference is 8 hours behind us, and you're only really going for a week during February half term and all that travel and all that jet lag. Why not just go to France? You know, this would be much easier for you. And my friends don't really understand this, so I'm going to try to explain it. I like to go skiing in Banff, and there are three resorts in Banff that form part of what's referred to as the Big Three ski area in Banff. And there is Mount Norquay, which is fairly good for kind of families and beginners. It's the closest to Banff, so it gets quite a lot of people for that. There is the Lake Louise ski area, which is a very large ski area. It's got a bit more of a sort of party atmosphere, so it's quite good for those who sort of like the sort of party atmosphere, a bit of après ski. It's very good for sort of snow parks. There's a couple of snow parks there, and it's also quite a sort of big sort of ski school there. So again, it's quite good for the sort of families and the beginners. And then the third ski area is Sunshine Village. Now, Sunshine Village is the least busy of the three ski areas. The restaurants and facilities aren't as nice as the other two. The lifts aren't quite as sort of nice and comfortable as the other two. But there is a very good reason to visit it, and that really is the snow and the large, what is referred to as backcountry ski area in Canada, which is off-piste for us. Sunshine Village also has a couple of Freeride zones, meaning these are areas that are monitored by the Snow Patrol to avoid avalanches. But they're not kind of ski areas that are groomed and sort of maintained in the same way as the main piece. And they're also not areas where the mountain rescue will come out and rescue you. So essentially it is an off-piste area with a few sort of little controls in place. And there is one of these that is sort of fairly world-renowned called Delirium Dive. Now, Delirium Dive, the access to it is right at the top of the main sort of pisted ski area. And there's quite a few conditions around it. Firstly, you have to go in pairs or groups of people. That way, if there is an avalanche in there and you are unfortunate enough to get caught up in that avalanche, there should be others there to kind of try and rescue you and dig you out. Secondly, all the riders that go down Delirium Dive have to carry a transceiver, sort of shovels, those long poles or probes, to try and find people. The transceiver obviously can be used to kind of detect people in the snow if they've been buried. The poles you can use to poke around and find people in the snow, and the shovels obviously you can use to dig them out. Now, to get into this Freeride zone and Delirium Dive, there is a gate. But before you get to the gate, there's large signs with lots of kind of dire warnings about the risk of death and how it's your responsibility once you pass this point, and you know, all of the usual kind of disclaimers that you get for these kind of places. And there's also a bit of a kind of history of Delirium Dive and how it sort of started really. Now, when you get to the gate is only opened by a working transceiver. So you have to have the radio transceiver with you. No transceiver, you can't get in through the gate. And obviously you can only enter one person at a time. So you can't just have one transceiver between the group. It has to be a transceiver per person. And once you're through the gate, you then have to hike up a few hundred meters up to the kind of top area of the mountain, to the top or the ridge that sort of then feeds into the large bowl. Right, and here there are a few options which I hadn't realised when I first did it, and my guide didn't tell me about when I first did it. I later found out from my friend who lived in Calgary. He was just like, yeah, you should have just gone around the side. It's a lot easier to get around the side. Which perhaps is a lesson for me for living in the moment. on that particular case. Now, the first path of Delirium Dive, sometimes referred to as the no way out path, takes you over a kind of cliff edge, I guess is the best way to describe it. And there's then very, very steep for a few hundred meters before it gradually comes round into the bowl. However, if you take a wrong turn on that one, you have to jump what is about a 10-foot cliff to actually reach the bowl and ski down for the rest of the area. The second way round, which you take a set of steps to get down to, is very steep at the start, and then gradually it flattens out as it comes down into the main bowl. And yeah, that was the way that I took first, which the guide hadn't sort of told me there was an easier way. If you carry on further round to the right, as my Canadian friend later advised me, there is a much more sort of softer or easier route into the powdery bowl. You do have to be careful for rocks on this one, but otherwise it's generally sort of an easier way in, and generally there has been a sort of more powder over to that right hand side. And I suppose that's the question: why would you risk life and limb to go down something like that when there is a perfectly good piece still on the mountain? And that is where this kind of idea of living for the moment comes in. There is a certain amount of freedom that you experience when you are sort of survival skiing, as I refer to it. Your kind of only focus really is on the line that you're taking down the mountain, on your next turn, your path, kind of really being in the moment. You're focused on you, the mountain, and the sort of people around you. And also, due to the restrictions on Delirium Dive, it is probably the quietest pace I've been skiing, and you are free, just kind of you, the people you're with, and the mountain. However, in recent years, there has been quite a dramatic increase in the number of injuries sustained in this area of Delirium Dive. And it's not that the mountain has become more dangerous. It's not that the Snow Patrol has become more lenient in their interpretations of whether avalanches will be caused. It's actually all due to these little guys. And there has been an increase in injuries because many people are using cameras like GoPros and things like that to try and capture their perfect ride down Delirium Dive. Probably the only time they'll end up doing it. And that means they aren't kind of in the moment when they're skiing. They're focused more on creating the perfect footage, getting their perfect video ready. So they go down the hill and they might not notice that little rock that's sticking out in front of them, or they might not notice that their binding was slightly loose when they did it up at the top if they're snowboarding, or they might not feel the kind of icy patch slightly underneath them just before they turn. And you also get people stopping in places that they really shouldn't be, in places where there's kind of steep icy patches, where there's snow that is kind of on the edge of forming an avalanche, and they make mistakes and they get hurt, and it's a real shame, because they are considering possibly closing Delirium Dive as a result. So that's kind of my advice really, is where you can do, live in the moment and concentrate on what you're doing. Put your phone down and don't worry so much about your TikTok. Now, I appreciate there is a certain irony to this, me sort of talking about living in the moment, having just recorded a video myself. But the other reason to live in the moment is that you're not going to leave behind any of those crumbs. By this I mean, don't leave behind, or don't sort of miss out on things that you will later regret. Regret is something that has cost many people their time, and if it's costing you your time, it's basically costing you your life. And when I go away skiing, it kind of takes me 3 or 4 days to really switch off from work and kind of live in the moment. So I won't go down Delirium Dive until I've sort of become centered in the skiing and the moment. But that has meant on occasion I've missed some good days skiing there, which I have regretted in some respects. And that is the other thing that we need to recognise in lockdown. We will all and have all made mistakes, and it's important to recognise this. It's important to recognise that when we do make mistakes, we admit them, we pay penance for them, if you like. We do things that we can to be forgiven by those that we've affected. We forgive ourselves, and then, most crucially, we move on from that. And this will help you to do the other two things that I've spoken about. It will help you to live in the moment, and it will help you focus on the things that you value. And it will give you the time to reflect as well. So I hope you found this useful, ladies and gents. And I will see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much.